Murdorf and the Mortal Flaw, Book 1, Chapter 10, The Land of the Gommits. The riders were silent as they trotted down the winding path. The words of the prophecies troubled their minds as they realized that they were the subjects spoken of by voices from the past. They knew these were troubling times and that war lay ahead. Events set in motion long ago were all leading up to the present age, the fulfillment of prophecies uttered in antiquity, and the culmination to all history, a time of great fear, iniquity, and world war. From a distance they could see vultures feasting on the carrion of the riders of Quaidar. Their red heads bobbed at the dead as though they hadn't eaten in weeks. Riding past the decaying bodies, a foul odor arose. The black rotting flesh was exposed, their teeth were brown and dingy, and their eyes were stained a dirty yellow. They looked as though they had been dead for weeks. If any of them were in doubt of the reality of the curse, they knew better now that their eyes had witnessed the evidence. The warriors rode away from Seir across the plains and hills and into rocky mountains. It was a pleasant day, and the sun was shining bright, and a gentle breeze was blowing. After a full day of riding, they neared the trees of Seir, just outside the land of the Gommits. It was evening. Riding to Skeener's home, they knocked on a sturdy wood door. The door sprang open. "Hello, Michael. Is Skeener here?" His wife was most welcoming. "Windsor! Oh my, and Gilmanza too!" She threw her arms around them and gave them a big hug. "You're looking for Skeener, I suppose." "Is he here?" asked Windsor, stepping inside. "Try the pub." "Are you going somewhere?" "I'm afraid so. Mission on orders of the king," Windsor said. He's been acting strange lately. Irresponsible, going to the pub and drinking. Probably what he needs is something like this with you boys." "Drinking? I've never known him to drink," Windsor thought to himself. The riders strolled around the streets. Nearing the local pub, they could hear music playing and a stirring of a ruckus. They entered the smoke-filled tavern cautiously just as a man was being hurled over a dining table and onto the floor. Dishes broke, women screamed, the pub filled with laughter at the unfortunate drunk. "I'll have another beer," slurred another inebriated man. "I don't see him anywhere," Gimonsel said, scanning the room. As they turned to leave, two men fell over the balcony and crashed onto the table, landing on the ground in front of Windsor. "Inebriated fools," Windsor grunted under his breath. Taking a second glance at them, Windsor recognized one of the drunken idiots as Skeener. Windsor held out his staff towards Skeener. Seeing the prophet, Skeener shouted, "Windsor!" Grabbing Windsor's staff, he helped himself to his feet just as the other guy was about to take another swing at him. Suddenly, to their surprise, the man drew a blank face. Someone's foot slammed into the back of his knee joints, folding his knees, and a beer bottle smashed across his head. The man fell to the ground, face first. Behind him stood Nadora, holding the broken bottle she had smashed across his head. Navatian nodded to her, smiled, and laughed. From across the bar came catcalls and whistling directed at her. "Windsor! Navi! So what brings you to the country?" Skeener's speech was slurred, making him even more difficult to understand than his usual stutter. Windsor and Navatian grabbed the drunken man and pulled him towards them just as a large Gommit with brawny arms rushed his way, a fist drawn back. As they shoved Skeener out of the way, Navi reared back and punched the man square in the face, burying his fist into the man's fat jaws. "Ouch!" moaned Navi, gripping his knuckles. The punch didn't move the man. Rearing his fist back, the man swung a drunken haymaker punch. Navi stepped across the man, soft-blocked the punch, the redneck's momentum now working against him, and with his left hand stepped under his arm and threw the man. The man tumbled completely over and landed on his back. While attempting to get Skeener out of the pub, the riders were pulled into the fight. Fat jaws flapped this way and that way as brute Gommits punched and ducked and punched. Cosby and Nimri looked at each other, grinned, and jumped in like two kids in a candy store. Now was their opportunity to try out their martial arts skills on real opponents. Navi decided to make a more passive approach now. Standing back in a corner, he watched the others brawling across the pub. Windsor threw a punch at one brute, sending him to the floor, but another man came up behind him and wrapped his arms tightly around the prophet. Windsor kicked his heel up to his groin, raked his leg with his boot, and grabbed the man by his head, sending him flying over and landing sprawled out on the floor. "That looks like that hurts, crony," Navi said. Seeing a chair fly towards him, Navi ducked, barely missing the heavy wood. "Why are you just standing there? Do something," Windsor said to Navi, taking a swing at another assailant. "Well, I'm enjoying watching the fight," Navi said, chuckling. "It's rather entertaining." Just then a drunken Gommit smashed into his side, knocking Navi to the floor and bending his purple hat. "That does it," pushing the drunk off, Navi said. Navi pounced to his feet as the man staggered to keep balance. As Navi was straightening out his hat, the big guy reared his fist to punch Navi. Ducking to miss the fat fist, Navi stood back up, and when the fist came at him a second time, Navi X-blocked the punch, caught his wrist with a twist, and stepped under his arm and to the side and threw the man. This time the man didn't get up. Navi straightened his hat, jumped back into the fight, enjoying the fun. "Come on, old man," one drunken fool shot off at the mouth, aiming his poison at Gamanza. "Bet you can't even fight." "Old man? I'll show you who's old," said Gamanza. And as he came close, Gamanza only threw 3 light punches, and the drunk fell to the floor. Next, a drunken bully grabbed Murdorf around the waist from behind. The brute was quite surprised when she grabbed him by his wrist, twisted it, heeled him in the groin, then grabbed his head and threw him over her and onto the floor. When she looked up, she caught the eye of Novatian. He had been watching her, and his grin indicated that he liked what he saw. There was fluidity in every twist and turn she made. He knew he would have to move carefully with this lioness. Weary of fighting oversized drunks, Windsor stuck out his crooked cane and muttered a couple of jumbled up words. Instantly, an inebriated fool elevated off the ground and began spinning wildly in the air, drawing the attention of every drunk in the bar. As Windsor pulled his staff down, the drunk crashed onto the floor. "Whoa!" slurred one beer-guzzling reveler. "That sure was easier," muttered Windsor, putting his brown prophet's hat back on his silver head. Now that we have earned the respect of everyone in the bar, Windsor and his crew made their way to the door without any further opposition, Skeener in tow, walking in a drunken stagger. Skeener threw his arms around Windsor and Navi. "It's so good to see y'all," he stuttered. Grabbing Novatian in a headlock, he rubbed his head with his knuckles. "What you been up to, old friend?" As they strolled toward Skeener's house, Skeener noticed Nodora. Where'd this hot babe come from? Skeener was laughing at his own words. "Let me guess. You're in love with me already," he said. "Okay, Skeener, let's go get some coffee," Novatian interrupted, attempting to keep his besotted friend from further embarrassment. "Skeener, that's the princess, King Chess's daughter," whispered Nimri. "A princess?" Changing the subject, he began to tell them how much he had missed them. "Man, I love you guys," said Skeener as he fell flat on his face. "Great," said Novatian. "Now how are we going to get him home?" Having failed at trying to get Skeener conscious enough to walk home, 4 of the riders each grabbed a limb and moved his dead weight. He was a big guy, so they mostly drugged him. Towing him to the barn, they spent the night in the hay among the smelly barn animals. Pulling straw out of the loft, they patted the dirt floors, taking advantage of some cushioning. This was terribly unfortunate for Novatian, who spent most of the night sneezing. The morning sun was just rising in the east when the riders awoke. Skeener, still sleeping off his hangover, was snoring loudly. Novatian nudged him with his foot to wake him, but Skeener didn't blink an eye. Novatian sneezed loudly, and Navi yelled at him, but to no avail. Windsor decided that bolder measures were needed, therefore he fetched a bucket of cold water and threw it on him. Rudely awakened, he now sat up with a mixture of anger and confusion. He moaned and grabbed his aching head, immediately feeling the effects of overindulging in alcohol. Lying back down into a pool of water, Skeener groaned. Where am I? You're in the barn, Novatian told him. What are you guys doing here? He asked, running his hands through his wet hair. We came to get you. Orders from the king. We have a mission. A mission? Inquired Skeener, his head clearing a bit. We will explain later, after you have sobered up, said Gamanza, gathering a saddle for Skeener's mount and handing it to Novatian. Well, why am I in the barn instead of in my house with my wife? He stuttered. Because we need you alive for the mission, Windsor retorted. You're no good to us dead. Ah, of course, good point, said Skeener. His speech was slow and dragging, making it even more difficult than usual to understand him. Holding his head, he continued, My wife would kill me if she knew I'd been drinking. Then again, she'd kill me for not coming home. She might think I've done something really bad. She knows you're with us, said Windsor. We'll make sure that she knows that you've been with us all night. Come on, you can sober up along the way, said Navi, reaching out his hand to help him up. As he rose slowly to his feet, gravity began to pull on his stomach. The room felt as though it were spinning. Skeener grabbed his aching head. His face turned pale and he grunted, expressing displeasure with movement in general. Navi reached out to steady him when suddenly he gurgled, being undisagreeable with his condition. In that moment, he upchucked, spewing vomit all over the prophet. The riders oohed and awed and roared with laughter. That is, everyone except for Navi. Sorry about that, mate, stuttered Skeener. Oh well, I guess that is what friends are for, Navi said, casting his gaze upon the vomit that ran down his shirt. He wiped the vomit that had landed on his hand onto Skeener's shirt. I think this belongs to you, he said. Suddenly the door that leads to Skeener's house into the barn flung open. The rapture of laughter had gotten the attention of Skeener's wife. What are y'all doing out here? She asked, looking at her husband's nauseated expression and the vomit on Navi's shirt. She had an idea. With an accusatory tone, she called him on it. I don't know what's gone into you lately, but you had better get your act together. Before he could answer her, she slammed the door without giving him a chance to respond. She did have a point. What has gotten into Skeener? Windsor wondered. This is uncharacteristic of him. Is he even fit to serve the immortal king and fight? Windsor wondered. Windsor never knew the man to drink alcohol. The last thing Windsor needed was a drunk tagging along, or worse, a betrayer. He was not fond of alcohol, having lived long enough to see its negative influence in people's lives. Staggering over to the first spot of water he saw, Skeener rinsed out his mouth with water from the horse's trough. He went inside to apologize to his wife and tell her bye. Then he returned ready to go with them. While Navi cleaned the vomit off his clothing, Skeener grabbed his mail jacket he had tucked away in the barn and slung it across the horse. Still feeling nauseated and his mouth as dry as a desert, he mounted the horse Navi had saddled for him. Skeener didn't know what to make of the girl riding with them, so he turned to inquire about her presence among them. So, we must be escorting this lady somewhere. Medora overheard his stuttering jibber-jabber. Not hardly, she said, smiling a knowing smile. Skeener tried to whisper, but his stuttering made him all too audible. So, if this is such an important mission, why is there abroad with us? Overhearing him, Medora glared at him. Then she broke out in a laughter. Windsor spoke before she had an opportunity. No, she is one with us, he said sternly. Part of our team? Skeener questioned, digging his hole even deeper, seemingly amused by the whole thing. He whispered to Novatian, Are we going to a ball? Novatian grinned. We feel ya, Nimri whispered. Yeah, royalty. They think they can do anything, Cosby piped. Feeling both nauseated and awkward, Skeener dropped back towards the rear where Navi was. Whispering again, he asked the prophet about the woman. This is Princess Medora, the king's daughter. You propositioned her last night, crony. I did what? Stuttered Skeener. You propositioned her. No, I didn't. Skeener's eyes grew wider as he considered the consequences of such impertinence. Enjoying seeing Skeener squirm, Navi proceeded to embellish the story even more, seeing it as an opportunity to get back at the man for vomiting on him. He leaned towards Skeener and whispered, "You asked her to marry you, and later you took off all your clothes and you ran around in the field naked, crony. You were a wild man." Twinge came over Skeener, and his mouth dropped open in shame. "No, I didn't." "You're pulling my leg, mate." "No, I'm not. We had to put your clothes back on you, mate." Skeener put his hand over his mouth and stammered, "Surely I didn't." "You did," Navi assured him, then whispered in his ear, "When you found out she was a princess, you danced for her in the nude." Skeener, now mortified by what Navi said, laid his torso over his horse and moaned, "Oh, I can't even show my face after last night. I can't even look at her again. Maybe I shouldn't even go." After riding for a while, Skeener inquired about the purpose of their mission. "So what exactly is this mission we are on?" "The Sword of Darvan," whispered Navi. You are in, aren't you?" Raising his torso from his horse's neck, Skeener was now completely sober again. "The Sword of Darvan? Am I in? Oh, like two vultures on the rotten flesh of a dead cow," he said. Embarrassed by what he thought he had done the night before, he remained in the back of the group, riding as far away from Medora as possible. He was humiliated at what he saw as serious transgressions. As the riders rode down the mountainous terrain, they passed a farmer feeding his sheep and goats cradled together in one pen, a single pig rooted around in the pen. Windsor pondered the ancient prophecies and considered the selections they had made. Have we selected carefully? Skeener is acting a bit different. He never gets drunk. Perhaps he has changed, Windsor prayed.